Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fringe Legal Edge. Let me first check. Jeremy, can you hear me okay? Can you see me okay?
Hey, yeah, I definitely can. Can you see me and hear me all right?
I can, yeah. Perfect. Thanks for joining me. As a brief introduction for anyone who's joining us for the very first time, Fringe Legal Edge is a experimental series, and I just like calling it experimental series because it sounds cooler, of indefinite length, where we talk with experts and leaders around topics that would give your practice an edge, whether they're doing that now, whether they're thinking about the big ideas. And Jeremy is certainly one of those experts and leaders. And Jeremy, firstly, thanks so much for joining me. You're in London still, I believe.
I am indeed.
Excellent. And Jeremy, for anyone who doesn't know him, he's the head of innovation at Norton Rose Fulbright. And before we get into the topic today, just as a background, because I think this is a conversation that Jeremy and I have been having in various forms for a little while, how we got to today and what we'll be talking about. I actually heard Jeremy speak about this topic of transformation about a year and a bit ago. He spoke about how law firms are very good at the what, that is the delivery of legal services, but not so much to how they actually present and deliver that service. That often gets put into this moniker of transformation. And we talked about what that means and what that's all about at the Fringe Legal Summit. So you can Google Jeremy Coleman and Fringe Legal to find that talk. It's absolutely free. And today is all about expanding on that, and really the two things that I wanted to follow up on, and so the viewers for the summit wanted to follow up on, were around how do you establish this culture supportive of the how, and practically, what does that transformation journey look like? What does that mean? How do you know as a firm, as a business, whether you are in the midst of that or you've come out to the other side at the end of one phase? So that's a bit of a background. Not sure how much of that Jeremy expected from me, but here we are. And Jeremy, just I guess to get things started, from your perspective, and we'll certainly get into the specifics of it, what's the transformation journey for you or the firm that you've gone through? So lay that out as a sort of the base framework, and we'll dig in from there.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. I guess first off, happy July 4th. I think it's a holiday for you guys there, isn't it?
Kind of, yes. For some of us. The show must go on, as they say, though.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me very much. I'm very pleased to be here. And so I think really before we kind of talk about our journey, I think it may be useful to kind of outline some basic principles. And I think firstly, it's very windy here, so if you do hear the wind howling, I do apologize. So I think there's a kind of a necessary precondition for this conversation, and that is your leadership, the senior leadership within the organization has to think that this is important. And if you don't have that, then it's going to be really difficult. And I think, we talked last time, and I think, many other people have discussed the topic of, what clients are, what they're saying and what they're demanding now, and how that's different from, 5 or 10 years ago. And very much, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a company or a client out there that isn't looking at innovation as a necessary aspect of their business. So as a precondition, you definitely need to have your leadership supportive of this, and they have to communicate that. So how they do choose to do that, I mean, the simplest and easiest way is that it just actually starts to form part of the vision and mission of the organization. And they align that mission and vision to, they have a specific mention of how innovation is important. It's amazing how often that kind of basic principle of strategy is overlooked, putting it into the mission of the organization, and then communicating it a lot. So I think probably there's a couple of things also when you're talking about culture and innovative culture. So that are somewhat unique to law firms. I mean, I'm assuming most of the people on the who are watching or listening will have a basic understanding of the kind of law firm structure, and that it's a partnership, and the partners own the business and they run the business at the same time. That presents unique opportunities, but also some I suppose difficulties as well. But what's perhaps the most unique about a law firm is the fact that most, if not all of them, maybe with a few exceptions, are still very much structured around the billable hour. And as that unit of measurement, it's now, I think the question is not, do we have a lab or do we have an innovation program? It's actually a really fundamental question about incentives. And if you want to have an innovative culture, assuming that you have met that kind of important precondition that your leadership is on board with this, the conversation about incentives is a difficult one, but it's one that needs to happen. And so it's kind of like putting your money where your mouth is. If you value that activity, then you will create room in your organization to do it, but you will also need to incentivize people in a way that makes sense for the organization. And so you would create, I think, in essence, innovation hours that are, from the organization's view, they count the same as billable hours. Now, they may be capped, what each organization is going to look at it differently, but that's really, really important. And I think one of the most basic fundamental aspects of culture change is making sure that you're incentivizing the behaviors that you want to have in the organization. So
yeah, and I think if I can sum both of those things up, because there's such important points, and especially now as people are distributed, and you maybe see, if you have your vision on a wall or whatever else it might be, you tend to see that a lot less. There's essentially this need for over communication is extremely important, right? It needs to become part of your brand identity, right? The blood for your organization, that everyone is aligned around that. And I think from a leadership perspective, it should be both talking about it, but doing it. And both in terms of, and I like the idea of the innovation hours. And yes, of course, you have to have that balance from against the business needs and outcomes, right? You can't just say, yep, we're going to stop the billable hour fully and everyone just goes on innovation hours, but it needs to be a balance. And it's so important to incent people to do the right behaviors, or for the right behaviors, or reward them for the right behaviors. And lastly, it should be across the entire business. It shouldn't just be the lawyers. It should be others as well, because of course it's a team effort. And as you think about delivering services, maybe you get legal operations involved, maybe you get IT, technology, all of those practice groups and partners involved too, right? So how do you incent each individual one in their own rights?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how did you, I guess, as you think about transformation, as you think about going through or have gone through this journey as a business, what are some of the ways that, I guess that we can break it down into 3 stages. How does one know that their firm, their business should be doing this, or it desperately needs to do this in some instances? Then how do you know that you're actually in the midst of it, right? You're transforming, and how do you then measure how well that's going? So let's start with, how do you know when to start this? And it may be that everyone should be doing it now, but
yeah, I mean, I can't put too fine a point on it. If you're not doing it, I'm sorry. The pace of change, I mean, we've talked about this before, and it's no secret. The pace of change now is faster than it ever has been, and it's only going to increase. And if we are not acknowledging that as, people, organizations, that's a problem, I think. Mm-hmm. So it's not a question of whether we need to be doing it. We all need to be doing it. And I suppose, slightly scary thing about that is that you look back over the kind of concept of organizational change and transformation, and typically it was done in a series of kind of difficult periods and then plateaus. And those, I suppose, difficult periods were the periods where new systems or processes or approaches or mergers or, you know, different things were being brought into the organization, different decisions were being made to change. The pace at which those difficult periods, I think, now are coming is it's no longer a question of plateau change. It's now a constant, and I think everyone who's been through that in the last couple of years will realize that it's actually now not a question of, okay, now we can kind of rest. You know, we brought in SAP, and that was a very, you know, a big change to the organization, or so now we can kind of rest. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case. So I think to your second question, but, you know, how do you do it?
Yeah.
Or I suppose, how do you know when you're doing it? It's just now it's the new reality, the new normal, so to say. But constant change now is, you know, new systems, they're constantly having to be upgraded, and you have to get your people used to the idea that there is no more plateau. We're always going to be in a constant state of change, which is difficult.
And I love the concept of just there's no more plateau, because it is, and you know, it's easy to think, great, we've just tackled this big project or small project or hundreds of small projects. Things will slow down, right? And it just won't. You're absolutely right. And every firm, every business I've spoken to, that's been the case. And actually, you want to have a team that's excited by that. You want to have people, not that you can't balance that, right? You can't sort of work people to death kind of thing, but you have to be able to say, look, we have a constantly moving target. It's a competitive market. And it's not just the pace of change of the profession is changing. It's just the pace of change of ideas is changing. And it's what clients want that's constantly changing, because they hear a lot more of what's happening in the consumer space, and they want a lot of that experience to be brought forward to the B2B space, right? They want their lawyers, they want their law firms and the business partners to work with them and deliver the kind of expectations that they expect from a Google or Amazon from a consumer point of view as individuals. And that's tough. It is tough to balance that, but that's how you win those big clients and continue proving yourself.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the tips for you as you know, how do you, if you're able to say, or just broadly talk about, how do you actually work to motivate and incent your team to make sure that they are continuing to be driven by wanting to implement and, you know, basically step up to the challenge?
Well, my team is unbelievable. They're just so passionate about being at the cutting edge of change, and they're very good at taking complex ideas and kind of breaking them down and then kind of being able to explain them back to the business. And I'm extremely fortunate and lucky that at least for our team, there's not, and this is unusual, right? I think people in our kind of space, they kind of attract the people that are comfortable with that change. And they typically don't need to be incentivized to change their behavior because they are already on the cutting edge. And that's great. You know, if you're one of these people that's kind of at a law firm or an organization where you're saying, I know we need to be doing this stuff, but the culture, either than the leadership or the organization, is just not really getting there, then you know, I think there's lots of organizations out there, lots of law firms out there that are doing that, and I think it's you know, they'd love to have you. That type of attitude is very difficult to teach, but you know, it's pretty incredible. I mean, our team is amazing. So I guess in terms of incentives, I mean, the biggest hurdle, I think, is obviously around changing or introducing a new way for people to get credit. And I referred to the innovation hours previously, but I think there's another element to it, which is, okay, great, you've got innovation hours. So does that mean that any sort of R&D research, any kind of thing, I can go off and just do that? And I think the answer to that question is no,
Yeah.
Along with it, you need to have some kind of structure and governance in place. And this is where I would, for our own organization and for many others, I would point to, an amazing resource, which is the Startup Way by Eric Ries. Talking about how do you create entrepreneurism, or the concept of introduce the concept of an entrepreneur to your organization as a unit of work, or as a discipline within its own right. And so I think Eric refers to it as a growth board. I've heard other law firms and organizations have an investment committee. And really that purpose of that committee is to engage senior leadership in decision-making process for deciding what those innovation hours can be used on. So you have this kind of structure and framework in place that allows the incentives to be properly directed, I suppose, or allowing people to their efforts to be directed in a place that's been kind of vetted and signed off. But that also then introduces the question of, what kind of knowledge or experience or capability is then required at the organizational level, at the management level, to be able to make those decisions. And so you see the introduction of kind of a different way of thinking, a different lens, perhaps, that you're looking at making decisions, examining these opportunities. And, the best probably corollary there is you have your investment committee or your growth board acting as if they were a venture capital fund, even though they're not investing, millions and millions of dollars and perhaps not investing in startups. But what they are doing is determining which projects have the best potential for bringing the firm new revenue, or which projects have the best for maybe continuous improvement or process reengineering, have the best potential impact for the most number of attorneys or lawyers. And so that then centralizes the decision-making power, but also there's a bit of a re-education process involved as well, because that kind of venture lens is different. It's something that law firms aren't used to.
Yeah, and I think that also affects from a leadership perspective, that will also absolutely change the risk profile and appetite for those individuals. Because when you look at it from that lens, and as you said, it doesn't mean that it's an investment of dollars per se or pounds or whatever currency you work in, but it's instead a investment in resource, right? So you're saying, actually, we back this project, this innovation initiative, whatever, because this is one of X, where if we get this right, the change will be 10X for the business, right? And it's worth us going down this line. And most people don't think of it that way. They think about making those tiny incremental changes, which are good when you compound. And if you have time as an aide, so you can sit there and wait for 20, 30 years, you'll get there. But sadly, that's not what, that's not the world that we're living in. And just to pick up the other point that you mentioned, I do like the idea. And I think there is often a misconception that giving people this freedom of coming up with the innovation hour, or the thing that's quoted frequently, 20% of your time should be worked on this, as in Google. Even then, it is within a business scope, right? It's not just like go out and do whatever you want. That 20% isn't just so you can just go and have a nap for 20% of your working hour. Maybe if that helps you and you can prove why that's beneficial, sure, I'd love to see that try. But you do need to have some sort of a process to say, look, not just because we do need to have governance, but also you often need someone else who can challenge your ideas and say, are you asking the right questions at this stage? And you talked about entrepreneurship. I would encourage people to go and listen to Kate Simpson from Bennett Jones in Canada. She talks about this quite a lot. Again, Google her entrepreneurship and Fringe Legal, you'll find it. And one of the things I wrote down from our last conversation, actually a question, and I wrote it down because I've stolen it and used it multiple times. So thank you. There were two. One was, I think you asked your team, or you framed it to your team in as such that, what if we decided to do this? What would we need to do? Right. So that's a good ideation exercise. So don't worry about the barriers. We've decided to do X. What do we need to do? And the second, which is where I want to pivot to, is, what if our clients decide to do X? How would we support that? And that's of course important, but I guess the counter side, well, not really the counter, but the opposite side of that is, how do you convince clients to be part of this as well, right? How do you get them to buy into this? Some of them, of course, will be asking for it, I'm sure. What about the others? All right, the majority that are kind of just taking along. How do you get them on board?
That's a really good question. I do think that when you have an opportunity to speak to a client in more of an ideation setting and a workshop setting, it changes the dynamic. And there's a number of amazing people in our kind of wider Transform team who have run some excellent workshops that involved everyone from our side, ranging from our development team, the kind of the legal design group, and then the partner and associate from our side, along with a multidisciplinary team on the client side. And that, I think, was probably something that at the time seemed a bit novel, but I guess the response that we had back from that was both the partner on our side and some of the senior people on the client side commented, firstly, from the law firm side, that's a wonderful way to make and build a relationship, because you're spending, the afternoon with someone. And then on the client side, some of the feedback we got was, I've been working here for 4 years and I've actually never met this person. But because we have we're all experts on our side on this particular project, it was a great opportunity to meet my colleagues. So, that doesn't really answer your question, and I realize that I may have purposely dodged it. But I think it's less about that kind of working together, and it's because you have to sell them on the idea first, right? Yeah. And so, what's purpose of this workshop? Why are we actually doing it? It's because we've got this potential solution in mind, and we think we might have something that could be very helpful to you. That kind of conversation, whether it leads to doing kind of a co-development or a collaboration, it really depends on whether you've kind of identified the right, I guess, firstly, problem. Is it a problem that the client actually has? And then secondly, is it a priority item that they would want to solve? And then I guess the third one, which some law firms I think are kind of grappling with at the moment, is a law firm, and perhaps the question on the client side, is a law firm, do we expect our law firm to be able to do this kind of thing? Yeah. And do we need to get comfortable with it? And I think that was a question that we were kind of asking ourselves 2 years ago. But we found that actually, as long as you have the right people in the room, and going back to kind of the multidisciplinary team, you've got your legal experts, but then you've got your technology experts, and you've got your design experts, and they're all in the room together, and they're all contributing. And that's a very powerful, very, very powerful sales tool, I suppose.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think obviously what I heard many, many times in that was, you have to be able to ask those questions and ask them of your clients, not just internally. And one of the things certainly I've noticed, I've read about, and I'm sure is circling the world of social, is a lot of clients are just not hearing from their lawyers, right? And this is the time where they want to have contact. They want you to get in touch with them, not just to ask how things are going, but also work with them on planning for what comes next, right? As you have to be able to understand their business, not just in the scope of, this is the legal service we provide, but this is what's happening to your business. This is what we think you're going to go through. And, we hear a lot about the big fours. That's kind of the big thing as someone who's providing accountancy services. Ultimately, you are understanding how the business works. You get a much better understanding of that. Legal often sees itself as a sort of very niche thing and in a bubble. You kind of have to break out of that and become a legal services business and then some. And I know, of course, the firm is doing that. You just hired someone for legal ops as well in Europe from Barclays. And, those kinds of things demonstrate that the trajectory is right. And then you have those conversations a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, and you know, we were not unique in this at all, but we, I think, have been credited as being the first law firm to really structure ourselves around what we refer to as headlights. So the industry sectors. So yes, you got a legal expert that knew that part of the law, but they were also an expert in that particular sector. And so that was I think, well, it was many years ago that we did that. But then, you know, there was this kind of push, I think, from some clients to say, well, we want our law firms to be in the same places that we are. So that was a big request that I think drove a lot of the international expansion, certainly from our perspective. We wanted to be next to where our clients were. And I think a lot of other law firms have done that. But now you're starting to see this, this kind of, I suppose, additional ability is saying, okay, well, in addition to having people that are industry experts, and in addition to be physically located in the places that you are, we actually have also seen the need to be able to provide these parallel services and these parallel solutions. And one very, you know, obvious and wonderful example is the one you just mentioned, with bringing Stephanie Hammond in to run our legal operations consulting practice. And that's, you know, that's just been, it's been amazing to have her, and to be able to provide the voice of the client is an incredibly valuable asset.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it sort of reminds me of a conversation I had with Heidi Gardner a couple of weeks ago here on this platform. And she was talking about exactly the things that you've just hit on from the client perspective, from the GCs, right? For in-house legal, the number one thing they wanted from their law firms was to collaborate further, to be domain experts, and not just be this, you know, we'll just give you everything will fit into this sort of rosy bubble solution, but actually be more specific about your approach, and having that voice of the client internally, as you said, that's so valuable. So we have about 3 to 4 minutes to go. Time flies. So I guess in wrapping up, I wanted to ask, to make the last 2 or 3 minutes super practical. What is one thing that's on top of your mind? I did not prep you for this at all, so I'll talk for 30 seconds so you can think about it. What are you working on with your team right now in terms of just thinking? How do you drive them? And, you know, it's been, no doubt, it's been a difficult year for everyone for many, many reasons, right? How do you keep the sort of the fire burning in the belly, so to speak, right now, to continue at the same pace, continue moving towards the same target, even though it may have been elongated a little bit in terms of time frame due to obvious reasons, right? How do you keep the motivation up? What are some practical things, and what would you ask of others to think about?
That's a great question. So I'm kind of famous for my kind of meandering, I wouldn't say speeches, but certainly like,
monologues.
You know, I read this thing and this is why it matters, and going from, you know, super macro level, like this is what's going on in the world, and down into like, and this is how it matters to us. And like I said before, I'm extremely fortunate and lucky to have a team that is already very, you know, very ambitious, and they understand the why of what we're doing. We talked about the what. We talked about the how. We haven't talked about the why. And the why for us is, you know, quite simple. It's to make our lawyers' lives better. And that is through, you know, a combination of using the right people, the right processes, and the right tech. And, you know, you've probably heard that 1,000 times, but that's really is our mantra. And so how do we motivate? So it is making sure that everyone's focused on the why and understands the why. But the other big thing is that, you know, if people in kind of my role, or who are looking to kind of for I don't know, motivation, one of the biggest things that I found, even to help motivate myself through what has been, you know, arguably, I think, a difficult time for everyone around the world, is that this is perhaps the greatest opportunity and gift for moving things forward. I mean, I always remark about that cartoon, or that slide. I think somebody posted, you know, what's been most responsible for your transformation. And you know, this isn't necessarily a fun time, but it's an amazing opportunity to be able to push forward digital transformation agenda. And I do hold like digital transformation as being kind of all encompassing and you know, in many respects superior to the goals and targets of innovation specifically. But yeah, I mean, this is potentially the greatest opportunity and gift that we've ever had, to be able to get people using collaboration tools, to get people used to using Microsoft Teams, to get people using, you know, a lot of things that they perhaps wouldn't have before. And, you know, that's it. We're here. We've got it. Let's go, guys.
Love it. Well, thank you so much. Jeremy Coleman, Head of Innovation at Norton Rose Fulbright, and he's a prolific speaker. You'll find him, I'm sure, at the next event you go to or watch, and certainly find him on LinkedIn. Jeremy, thank you, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you very much, Ab.
And for all of our US listeners, happy 4th of July. Enjoy the long weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Great.